The NWSL regular season kicks off on March 25th, so make sure you watch all the games on Paramount Plus. And that's right, we're doing every single team preview podcast and on YouTube. So go ahead and tell your friends. Let's chat all about Chicago Red Stars. Let's start with a team overview, Lisa. Head coach, Chicago Red Stars head coach, Chris Petrucelli. Second year for Petrucelli with Chicago Red Stars. They hired him out of SMU. Collegiately, there was a lot of question marks around how this team was going to fill this head coaching role after the departure of former head coach Roy Dames. They went ahead with Petrucelli. It sort of felt like when we talked about this hire initially, kind of felt like a little bit of a safe hire. They wanted to make sure that they got somebody in here to go ahead and just roll with the assistant coaching staff that was in place at the time, and go ahead and get this team together and make sure they had a safe and comfortable environment to compete in moving forward. So going into this regular season, they said farewell to some former assistants. Julian Stitch coaching men's D3 with University of Chicago has had a great success with that team, and they went ahead and had to maybe make some more hires to sort of flesh out their technical staff. And probably the biggest and most notable promotions and hires was the announcement of Michelle Lomnicki, no longer the associate or assistant GM, but full general manager of the Chicago Red Stars. And they also announced Ella Massar as assistant coach, was previously with Kansas City Current in 2022. So trying to make some upgrades in certain areas for this team, really just on the front office and technical staff side of things. And that's not including the roster, which we'll get into in a little bit. But this team finished their 2022 in sixth place. They made a return to the playoffs with a 9-6-7 record, fell in the quarterfinals to San Diego Wave FC. And we were looking at this team as maybe one of those teams who needed to make sure that they tried to retain a number of free agency, because Chicago Red Stars were the only team with 7 free agents heading into this offseason. And we knew that it was going to be a challenge for this franchise to try and retain any of them, really, let alone all 7 of them. So kind of taking a look at what they lost in the offseason in terms of the free agency period, taking, into consideration how they navigated their draft. At that point, they really needed to try to utilize the draft to bulk up some of the roster, and taking a look at just general moves. Like, what was Michelle Lomnicki going to bring to Chicago? And she delivered, in my opinion, a couple of important pieces. But all things considered, we ended up giving them a C+ for their off-season grade. Yes, they lost a lot of players to free agency, and maybe you can't hold a team at fault for that, because players are going to exercise their right to free agency as they fought hard for in the collective bargaining agreement. But that also means that you as a franchise can try to dabble in that as well and try to make some signings. And they did re-sign Aaron Wright. They did re-sign Yuki Nagasato. And while they turned 3 selections into a 4-player selection for the draft, they essentially still just have 3 players on this roster, because Grace Yelcom has declined to go pro due to an ongoing undisclosed illness, so will not be making the leap to pro. So taking all these things in consideration, we gave them a C+. I'm still comfortable with that grade. I think you're still comfortable with that grade. But was there anything within this offseason that really kind of jumps out for you that maybe symbolizes that the Red Stars will be competitive and be okay in this regular season?
No. I'm going to be really honest with that. No, I think they suffered a lot of loss. Chicago suffered a lot of loss. We saw it's almost back-to-back years for this team dealing with a lot of changes, whether it's in the front office or on their roster. And to lose 7 free agents means you're not just losing 7 players on your roster, you're losing 7 starters, 7 veterans, 7 players that have also been with Chicago for a significant amount of time. And in some of those names, a lot of people, a lot of players, when they got to Chicago, they usually started there and they stayed there. And to kind of see a little bit of a mass exodus from Chicago, I think says a lot about kind of how that club was for many years. And now that they are trying to change things and turn things around, I think it's great that Yuki Nagasato has re-signed with this Chicago Red Stars team after being traded back last year from Racing Louisville to Chicago, and also Erin Wright solidifying herself in the defensive end. That's a really good get for Chicago. I mean, in terms of like the club, no, I think they deserve a C+. I don't think they did anything too crazy in the offseason, but individually, they've got some great players that have worked their tails off. I mean, look at someone like a Tierna Davidson coming back from injury. She was just called in with the U.S. women's national team. I think she had a great offseason personally. I think Mallory Swanson had a great offseason, formerly Pugh. Mallory Pugh of the Red Stars and the U.S. women's national team. Swanson had a fantastic offseason. So individually, yeah, they want to win and they want to do great. But as a club, I'm just not so entirely sure how it's going to come together, because I give them this C+. And when we look at the roster for Chicago, they got some good players, I think, that will bulk some things up for them. But overall, it wasn't anything too crazy, right? With the trade with Angel City, getting someone like a Carrie Riccaro in the midfield, that was needed, that was necessary for this roster for the Red Stars, because they lost a lot in their midfield, a lot of attacking power and presence. And Riccaro is a player that can defensively lock things down, but also contribute in the offensive end, score some goals. I think I'd really like to see the partnership between a Carrie Riccaro and a Mallory Swanson, how that develops. I think that could be very fun to see.
Oh no, I'm with you 100%. I think when we're looking at some of those offseason moves for the team, they came in later stages of the offseason for Chicago. There was a window of time there. I mean, we're talking about free agency kicking off, like really taking off in mid-November, and Chicago making some of these moves kind of around the draft and post-draft as well. So we're talking just a couple of weeks before preseason really gets rolling for some of these teams. Carrie Riccaro, that trade with Angel City for, I believe it was $65,000 in allocation money.
Yep.
I think if Riccaro can sort of mimic what she did for Angel City in 2022, and even just build on that just a little bit. Maybe you add another goal, or maybe you add like 2 more assists. Even that could be the difference maker for this team that has lost so much in its midfield. But announcing the signing of Julia Bianchi. We're talking a lot of excitement around Brazilian players who have representation across so many clubs right now in NWSL, exiting a She Believes Cup with a lot of different players, for people who are getting maybe a first glimpse at some of these players in action with their NWSL side. So I thought that was a very good signing. And Bianchi, I mean, this is a player who was rated with Palmeiras pretty highly. I mean, one defensive midfielder of the year, I believe, multiple years, but coming off of a most recent win in that award as well. So I think there's good things on paper for this Chicago Red Stars team, but there's also a lot of loss for this team as well. And I think that's going to be the difference between this year and last year. There was a similar narrative around the Chicago Red Stars team in their 2022 offseason. They had a mass exodus in 2022. They had a number of players request trades and make their exit from this franchise. And we thought, how are they going to fare? Is this going to be the first year that Chicago Red Stars miss out on the playoffs? And I think the difference in that is, while they had a lot of players make an exit in 2022, they still had a lot of veteran pieces on this team, whether it was a Colaprico, a Di Bernardo, even someone like an Alyssa Motts at the time who was making her way back from injury, Aaron Wright, Yuki Nagasato, who had made a return from Louisville, Alyssa Nair is included in that equation. But now that's not necessarily the case for this Red Stars team moving forward in 2023. So while they've got good pieces in it, these are still pieces that are going to need time to get acclimated with each other. Kari Riccaro is one of those veteran pieces that maybe this team could sort of pull from and get some of these breakout performances. But this is going to be her first year with this team in Chicago Red Stars. Same for a player like Bianchi. And then we're not even talking about the addition of youth to this team. So we've got a number of players who are going to enter their sophomore season with Chicago. And now you're going to add even more youth in this one as well. So there's a lot to chat about for this team, I think, in terms of the what ifs and whether you go by things position by position or line by line. I think maybe that's where you're going to try to find some answers.